So today's a bit of a special day. It's a long weekend, and we're getting ready for Lent. We'll be starting a new series at the beginning of Lent called Gianting, or something like that. How to become spiritual giants, how to mature, how to grow in our spiritual lives. But between now and then, we figured let's just have some fun. And I happen to have the great pleasure and privilege of having a friend of mine, really good friend of mine from Vancouver, joining me. And her sister actually lives here in Toronto and visits SMSK not occasionally. I'd like to welcome them up on the stage, and I'd like you to welcome them with me. Robin Van Riel and Rachel Sewers. Welcome. So, sisters, if you haven't noticed, grab a seat, make yourselves comfortable. So let me just tell a story just for fun. When I was a surgical resident in Vancouver, I would go over to Tim and Robin's place. Tim is Robin's husband, and most of the time I would just sit in a chair and just pass out from fatigue. Then they'd give me their son, who was something between like 0 and 2 years old, because this happened multiple times. Like this was a once or twice or 3 times a week kind of occurrence, right? And I'd hold him for a bit, and then I would just pass out again. And then they'd wake me up, and we'd have dinner, and then I'd sit in the same chair, and I'd fall asleep again. And eventually, I'd find myself at home. They were like my family away from my family of origin, and they really took care of me very, very well. In fact, they continue to take care of me in a variety of different ways. And Rachel was a bit younger then and is now still very young. So we won't go there because I'm just starting to dig my hole. And some of you in the last couple of years have seen me walking around with like this green stuff in a container, in a jug, in a mug, in a something. And I actually now have my own little NutriBullet in the church kitchen, where I go and I make myself a green protein shake. And this all started once when, Carnivore John was visiting Vancouver for some conference or something, and Robin picks me up from the airport and I say, "How's it going? What's new?" and so on. And she tells me, "Well, not too much is new. Things are pretty much the way you left them, this and that. Well, by the way, we're vegan." So thus began my education about why do people, I thought just crazy people became vegan. But when I moved to Vancouver, I thought only crazy people ran and did yoga. Well, 5 years later, I was running and doing yoga, right? And so I've become a little bit more open-minded. And so I asked Robin, "Why did you become vegan?" And Robin told me a bit of a story. So we'll start with that, and Rachel can just jump in, whenever you're ready as well. Yeah.
Okay. So the reason for a diet change in our life, and it wasn't so much vegan as it was just eating clean and natural whole food, right? Because you can have a can of Coke and eat white spaghetti, and that's vegan, but it's not necessarily clean, nourishing food, right? So when Abuna is saying vegan, just remember, think of just clean whole food, not necessarily empty calories. Right? And the original trigger for this was our mother was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2011, so 8 years ago. And she was devastated. I mean, cancer runs in our family, so I guess you could say it's not surprising. However, knowing our mom, has none of those typical risk factors that you would expect to be related to breast cancer. She doesn't drink, she doesn't smoke, she's not overweight, like all of those common high risk factors that they associate with breast cancer, she had none of them. Except for stress, and you can blame Rachel. So this, we started to do some research and read, and Rachel is studying naturopathic medicine now, but earlier on in that time, she already had an interest towards like natural health. So we started to do some research, and watching a dozen documentaries, reading tons of, like another dozen books on diet and disease and all of this, we found that there is a very strong connection between diet and health. And so that's where it began. And Rachel started with giving my mom a list of foods that we typically don't normally eat in our diet at all. And foods we've never even heard of before. We couldn't even pronounce them, like goji berries, that one how we can say, or acai berries, right? We couldn't even pronounce these. So she came up with a list of foods, so she can talk about how she found that and why.
Okay, really the intention behind the list of foods was what were the strongest cancer-fighting foods available. Because when my mom went to the oncologist, they right away wanted to cut her up, give her chemo, put her through radiation, and I was like, hold on, let's just think about this for a second. Let's see what alternatives we have. So that's really where all the superfoods came from. There's just basically the most powerful cancer-fighting foods that we could find, and we decided to go against what the oncologist suggested, and we didn't do any chemo or radiation, and she just did a surgical removal and stuck with a really strict diet where she cut out meat, because meat is something that cancer can live off, meat and sugar. So those are two major changes that she made, and thank God she's healthier now than before her diagnosis. So yeah.
And so you might be wondering, like, okay, well, this sounds really great, and you know, these lifestyle things, and we talk about lifestyle things not unfrequently here. We've talked about how to organize your day. We've talked about anxiety, money, and all these things. But I mean, at the end of the day, the church is not like the self-help section of Chapters or Indigo, nor is it the diet or nutrition section. So what are we kind of doing here? What really piqued my interest, I have to say, is that Robin told me that changing their diet had some unexpected effects, and which are not less or more important than the things that you already described, but that's kind of what piqued my interest and made me think, you know what, these people that I love really so much, sitting out in the audience now, and those of you watching on YouTube, you know, you've got to hear this. You got to hear this from the horse's mouth.
Right. Well, so obviously it's easy to think or expect that the food that you're going to eat is going to affect you physically, right? So it sounds very common sense. What I didn't expect was an emotional effect and a spiritual effect at all. I had no expectation. It just happened. And I was shocked and surprised. I started having so much more energy in my day. Okay, that's a physical effect. However, emotionally thinking, like my mind was just focused and clear. Like you can think with clarity, and you're less, erratically emotional, like with mood swings and stuff. None of that really happens. It's very calm. You're very balanced, I could say, emotionally balanced. And then it also, I think that calmness and that emotional balance and that clarity just opened up this whole new avenue spiritually, and started to felt like I became a real Christian after that. Like it just spiritually grew so much. I wanted to know Jesus. I wanted to know more. I wanted to, there was that passion just started. And so between the physical effects of having more energy and the emotional, mental clarity and the spiritual connection, I was hooked. So I didn't miss the barbecues. I was hooked. I just loved it.
And then Rachel, Robin was telling me that you also have found some kind of spiritual effects of your nutritional changes. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, yeah, I was telling Robin that as soon as I cut out a lot of the processed foods and meats and dairy and all of those things, I felt just more conscious and closer to God. I felt like it was very easy for me to be receptive to the Word of God. And like Robin said, you just feel at peace. it's very much like the church is on the right track with the fasting, and so much of the year we spend without any of the meats and the dairy and eggs and all of that. I really believe that the Bible and the foundations of our church are set up for us to live this healthy lifestyle for a reason, for our connection to God.
Yes, I remember thinking, like, growing up years and years here, and then this whole fasting thing at church, I'm like, that's stupid. And I grew up learning the 4 food groups, and you have to have dairy, and you have to have meat, and like that's how I was educated. And then after this, I was like, wow, the church had it right all along. Like, they really knew it.
So, if half the audience is looking at you and saying, yeah, good for you, but not for me, that's fine. And if the other half is saying, well, okay, so where do I start? What should I do? You gave me some advice, Robin, and I'm sure, Rachel, you gave Robin and Mom some advice. What would you both conjointly give the beginner omnivore advice? How do you start? I mean, when I visited you, Robin, you know, your kitchen looked nothing like mine. I mean, there's a Vitamix, there's a dehydrator, there's a juicer, there's all kinds of raw things, and there's other things growing, you know, in little pots, and right, there's sprouts. There's like they don't have countertops in their kitchen. They have grass, you know. But when I called it grass, they're like, no, it's not grass. I'm like, what is it, weed? And they're like, it's Vancouver, right? You know, and they're like, you know. People change. You leave for 2 years, you come back. I'm just kidding, right? And then they're like, no, there's sprouts, right? I'm like, oh, so you guys are growing. They're like different kinds of sprouts, right? So do I like need to? I need to overhaul my kitchen.
You can just start with a blender. I think that's where you start with a good blender. I actually started with like a Magic Bullet, tiny little thing, and then we couldn't fit enough in it. That little cups that they come with. So then we got a NutriBullet, and then that's a little bit bigger, and then after eventually we went to a Vitamix, because you can, I thought, oh, let's get a Vitamix so I can give some to my husband and some to the kids, but now I drink the whole Vitamix jar. Like, it progressively, you want more and more.
Yeah, small changes.
Start with a blender.
So start small and grow.
Yeah.
What changes would you recommend, Rachel, first?
I mean, ideally, it's not about what you add initially, it's what you take away. So first thing in the morning, most people grab a coffee, and that's like one of the most acidic things you can put in your body in the morning. And that sets the tone for the rest of your day, because overnight you're digesting, your body's trying to work hard to eliminate all these toxins, and then the first thing you do is toxify more. So the first thing I recommend in the morning, water, lemon, like stay away from coffee until you have a actual meal of like whole food, something real that you can put in your body, and then you work your way into being like a smoothie goddess like Robin. Like, it takes time, I think.
And you will start off making things that taste gross. Like,
Yeah.
You're just starting out. You'll learn. You'll figure out what things go together. And I followed recipes, and like I read tons of books, but I don't look at books or at recipes anymore. Now I just know like what I can combine and what I can't.
And what are other changes you can expect in your life? Like, you talked to me a little bit, Robin, about how my grocery shopping is going to change and stuff like that. And tell us a little bit about what effect that had on your kids, because a lot of people have kids, some do, some don't. And tell us, you know, the kind of what the experience was like doing this with a family.
Well, so my original approach was too extreme. Like, I went way over on the vegan raw food, like on that end of the spectrum, that it did cause a challenge, like for my husband and my kids. So I had to like kind of come back, but it took time to figure out the right balance point. And initially I was worried about the kids, because like I said, we were educated that you have to have 4 food groups, and milk is good for you, and drink milk, and the kids need milk because they're growing and all this, right? So I was worried about my kids' health if I was going to change their diet. But I made sure like to do some research and found that kids who don't drink milk and kids who don't eat too much meat, they're okay. And it's not that they never do. Of course, they go to birthday parties, they eat whatever they want, hot dogs and pizza and whatever, that's fine. I just typically don't make it for them at home. For my husband, same thing. Like he's very attached to like a dinner plate that has like a piece of meat and some carb and some veggies maybe, right? So this is like a whole mental shift on like what to expect your dinner plate to look like.
And if you notice, Canada Food Guide has finally caught up.
Yeah.
So.
If you've seen the new proposed Canada Food Guide, it's changed more in this direction.
Tell us about that.
So now dairy is not a recommended food group, and it's just a picture of a plate, which is literally 80% vegetables, a little bit of meat, and then you want to add in like your olive oil and healthy fats. So they're encouraging healthy fats to be eaten now because fats in the past have been really vilified. Like they thought that fats was the cause of cardiovascular disease and cancer and all of these chronic diseases, when actually healthy fats are preventative. So it was sugar that was the real victim or culprit. Thank you.
And now it's gingivitis that's causing heart disease. So God only knows what'll be next. But change your diet and brush your teeth. Just a few verses from the Bible to share with you, and just kind of wrap it up because we started late, so today might have to be a little bit short for us to end in time. But see, the whole issue is kind of our relationship with food. Let me make it personal. My relationship with food every now and again supplants my relationship with God. I even find myself talking to friends, and those of you who know me well have heard me say this, saying, I love food. Which doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't, my expectation of food is very close in some ways to the expectation I ought to have of God. When I have had a long day and I'm tired and I'm exhausted, what do? I go home and I raid the fridge, right? Why? For nutrition? No, for comfort. When I make like a nice dinner, what am I looking for? No, I'm looking for nutrition. Isn't it kind of ironic that I take a piece of meat, which is dead, that were you to leave it alone for not very long, it would rot. But I put it inside my body and I expect it to give me life. Like we eat to nourish ourselves, right? So we can live. Like what would happen if we stopped eating? Well, you would die, right? So I eat to live, right? Like most of the time I live to eat. But suppose I've reversed it and now I eat to live, right? So I'm expecting something which is dead, which needs help to not rot. Like you have to put it in the fridge. It needs external assistance to not rot because it is full of corruption, the fathers tell us. And I put it in my body and then I expect it to give me life. I'm not telling you to become like vegetarian or vegan or anything. I'm just saying that the expectation that I have of food is an expectation that maybe I'm supposed to have of God. In Hosea 2:8, it says something really, 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 really interesting, which I think characterizes a little bit of what my relationship is with food sometimes. It says, "For she does not know that it is I who give her grain." God is talking to Hosea about Israel. And he's talking about Israel as though Israel has been an unfaithful spouse that was promised to him, betrothed to him, like a wife to God, and has now been unfaithful. And so he says, "I give her grain and new wine and oil, and lavished on her silver and gold, which she used for Baal, which she used for an idol." So I gave her something for what? What did he give it to her for? She knew what it was for. She used it to worship an idol. So she knew that it was for worship. She got that part right. But for the worship of who? Of God. So God has given us all the created world, everything in the created world. He has given it to us for us to worship him. So the fathers teach us, when it comes, for example, to fasting, not to swing the pendulum one way or the other. right? We all I experience very much of what Robin and Rachel described. When I'm fasting, I find it easier to think. The other day, I've been trying to eat healthy now for a couple of weeks, and about 4 or 5 days in, just 4 or 5 days in, I had guests here, and we took them out for sushi. And then we were out for sushi, and I was making fun. It was on a Sunday. I was making fun of all-you-can-eat buffets right here, right? And then what did they want? They wanted all-you-can-eat sushi. So we went. I restrained myself, but I did eat a bit of this, and I cherry-picked little things here and there. The rest of Sunday night and all of Monday till about 4 p.m., I was in a fog. I couldn't think clearly. I didn't realize how much enjoyment I was getting out of life. How much clarity I was getting. It's so much easier for me to pray. It's so much easier for me to do prostrations. It's so much easier for me to tie my shoes, when I'm not bloated, right? When I'm not full, right? Somebody waiting for Wheel-Trans. There's a Wheel-Trans person at the door here to pick you up if you're waiting for Wheel-Trans. This is some advice from one of the Desert Fathers to a new convert. I always like to consider myself a beginner. He says to them, eat simply and stop before you're full. What do I mean by this? First, eating simply means that one's food preparation should be of the normal, non-fasting type. Nothing special, nothing designed to entice your palate. This only reinforces one's love for food. This does not mean that one's preparation should result in food being repugnant, being repulsive, or being disgusting. No, rather it means that it should not inflame one's desire for more, nor incite one to eat more. So not overly spicy, not overly rich recipes, and so on. It should be simple, meager, life-sustaining. It is still permissible for food to be interesting or pleasant to eat. After all, it's not a sin to enjoy food in moderation. Simple advice. Very simple, clear advice. We don't need to swing the pendulum one way or the other. St. John the Short gives us some advice about fasting, but it's related to this. He says, if a king wanted to take possession of an enemy city, he would begin by cutting off the water and the food of his enemies, that they would either die of hunger or surrender. It is the same with the passions of the flesh. If a man goes about fasting and hungry, his enemies of his soul will grow weak. It's God himself who wishes to feed us with his own hand. We were talking about that upstairs, right? So food is good. The things that God has given us are good. But it's kind of looking at what our relationship is to food, what are our expectations of food, how do we use food, and what those things belong to God that we have appropriated to food.
Can I add one practical tip to the same comment that he just read about eating food, and it's okay to eat the nice, tasty, beautiful food that you really look forward to, but in moderation? Just a tip, like a practical tip for that. How many meals or how many times do you eat during the day or the week or whatever, approximately like a percentage on average, do you eat alone? Roughly. Just say a guess. 80% alone maybe? Okay. That's about right. That's pretty good. I agree with that. So my practical tip for that is when you are eating alone, that 80% of the time, that's when you can make that food intake the rich, whole, nourishing foods when you're eating it alone. That way, when you're with family, you're out with friends, you're at a party, you're wherever, you're going out, you're visiting, you're being treated, you have no guilt feeling. You can take in and eat whatever they're eating and feel comfortable with it and not make anyone else feel uncomfortable. Because the 80% of your time, you had your rich, nourishing, whole food already. So then you can just enjoy the rest when you're with other people.
Rachel, do you have any closing comments, any closing advice?
That's it, unless there's questions.
We'll take questions right after prayer. I just want to close with, this is my favorite clip about food from Over the Hedge. So I'll invite you to turn your attention to the screen. just a second. We'll fix the sound, and also let me tell you. So this movie is like from 2006 or something. It's these suburban, animals like raccoons, skunks, squirrels, and so on, who realize that if they're going to hibernate, they need to collect enough food in this log and store it up. And they're trying to find different ways to collect food. Well, they hibernated, they woke up, and there was a subdevelopment all around their forest. So they used to get food from the forest, but now they're getting food. The raccoon is trying to explain to them that you don't have to get food from the forest anymore. It's much more efficient if you go get food from the garbage bins of the people who have moved into this subdevelopment. But looking at his perception of human behavior towards food is what we're looking at. We'll just try to get the sound working for you.
They dry the food, they wear the food. That gets the food hot, that keeps the food cold. That, I'm not sure what that is. What do you know?
So we're almost there. We got sound. We lost the video. Try one more.
That's what they eat when they eat too much food. That is when the guilt when they eat more food. Food, 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 food.
Okay.
We just get the food and go. Really, do they have it or not? Let me see. It was in the box. They always have food with them. We eat to live. These guys live to eat. Let me show you what I'm talking about. The human hog is called a pie hog. The human being is called a couch potato. Is the device of summer food. That is one of the main voices of food. That is the portal for the passing of the food. That is one of the many food transportation vehicles. Humans bring the food, take the food, ship the food, they drive the food, they wear the food. That gets the food hot, that keeps the food cold. That, I'm not sure what that is. What do you know? Food! That is the altar where they worship food. That's what they eat when they eat too much food. That is when the guilt when they eat more food. Food, 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 food. So, you think they've had enough? Well, they don't. For humans, enough is never enough. And what do they do with the stuff they don't eat? They put it in gleaming silver cans just for us.
Let's stand for one last song and let's pray.